Debate, the Honourable Member for Guelph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honour for me to rise in the House today, and I'll be sharing my time with our member from Oakville North Burlington, the Parliamentary Secretary, and looking forward to her comments as well, Madam Speaker. Bill C-21 really represents a momentous step for Canada. We're looking at using this piece of legislation, amongst others, to eliminate gun violence in Canada. And if it's passed, it will be the most significant reform to Canada's gun laws in a generation. I'd like to try to start, first of all, by thanking the stakeholders that have contributed to this bill, but more specifically, the stakeholders in my constituency of Guelph who have provided feedback that has informed the measures that are in this bill, and our conversations continue with them. While much of these consultations were conducted in relation to the previous pieces of legislation, I'm very pleased to see that this feedback has been incorporated since March 2021, when the former Minister of Public Safety heard from the Guelph Area Police Services, the local municipal politicians, and the Guelph organizations that are dedicated to the fight against gun violence. They are concerned that previous proposals allowing municipalities to opt in or opt out of gun control measures would have created a patchwork of regulations across the country that wouldn't have been nearly as effective as what we have in front of us this morning. This bill solves that, and indeed, if it's passed, this bill will make it illegal to purchase or sell handguns anywhere in Canada. Speaker, this is incredibly important to both my constituents and to me in the current context, because for years, Guelph was considered the safest place in Canada. While it's still among the safest, Guelph has had an increase in gun violence that is concerning for all people that are living in Guelph. The gun-related crimes that we're seeing in our community, according to public data from the Guelph Police Services, have more than doubled since 2020. There were 8 charges of using a firearm in the commission of a crime, which is up from 3 the prior year. This is not the direction we want to be heading in. And while the Canadian Border Services Agency and other bodies have been provided with more resources by our government to help prevent gun crimes, the reality is that we need to stop handguns from being sold in the first place. Even one crime involving a firearm that could have been prevented is one crime too many. And I've heard the members across the way saying that the illegal traffic of guns is a concern, which is a concern, but the legal transmission of guns is something that we can do today to address the movement of guns in our community. It's important, especially when you consider the data that we're getting from researchers at the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Responsibility at the University of Guelph, which shows that nearly 6 out of 10 women who are killed are murdered by their current or their former partner, while only 6% of these women are killed by a stranger. Just over 1/3 of the total number of femicides are committed by a perpetrator armed with a gun, more than any other method of killing, while the likelihood of a woman being killed by a gun goes up to 42% of women living in rural areas. This bill looks to address this alarming reality. It would permit authorities to revoke a firearms license in cases of domestic violence or criminal harassment, when a protection order has been issued against a current license holder, or when a red flag order is issued. I'm also encouraged to see that the advice of organizations representing women and survivors has been included in the amendments to protect the identity of the person that's asking the court to apply for this mechanism of using red flag or yellow flag laws. This is just one example of how feedback from communities affected by gun violence has been integrated into this bill. Similarly, this bill also seeks to better protect Canadians experiencing mental health crisis. Over 80% of gun-related deaths are suicides, which is a heartbreaking reality. The impact of this is not only felt by the individuals, but their families and by our entire communities. In fact, Madam Speaker, last week I spoke to a veteran of the Afghan war, And one of his comments was how many of his comrades have died since the war to suicide. and guns are being used in those cases. One of the most heartbreaking elements of this is speaking to families of individuals who have dealt with this loss. They tell me that it's possible it could have been prevented if guns were removed from the situation in the first place. And these are legally purchased firearms. Through this bill, a yellow flag or a red flag would make it more likely that such a tragedy could be prevented. As in other appropriate cases, a chief firearms officer could suspend an individual's license for up to 30 days if a member of the public, such as a family member or a neighbor, were to contact the chief firearms officer with information about a license holder being at risk. This would allow someone to recover or to seek treatment without having the ability to purchase guns or to acquire them. Speaker, the urgency of this bill is clear, but unfortunately, since the government has stated in its intention to pass C-21 into law, we've seen a spike in the number of handgun sales across the country. By introducing additional regulations, the government's preventing a surge in handgun purchases in the period between now and when it's passed, which is the right approach to ensure that the bill isn't aiming at a moving target. Speaker, the premise and rationale of this bill are sound. It recognizes the reality that handguns are the preferred weapon of criminals and that banning their sale inherently makes other people safer. Not only is the prevalence of gun crimes increasing in Guelph, as I previously mentioned, but since 2009, violent offenses involving guns have increased by 81%, and 47% of Canadians say that gun violence poses a serious threat in their communities. We only need to look across the border to see that if we continue down the path we're on now, it's only going to get worse and worse until it's going to be many times harder to correct the situation. We need to learn from what we see in Canada and the scale of gun crimes in other countries and not dismiss mass shootings as something that can't happen or doesn't usually happen in Canada. We need to act now, and this bill takes a common sense approach to achieve the ambitious action of reducing gun violence while respecting law-abiding owners of guns such as farmers. It's truly unfortunate that there have been several unsuccessful attempts by some of people here that are mischaracterizing this bill as something that could target law-abiding gun owners, and that's simply not the case. The legislation is in no way about targeting legal gun owners. In fact, its sole purpose is to create safer communities for every single Canadian. Gun owners that adhere to the law will not face any undue hardship as a result of this bill. Clearly, handguns are not used for pest control or to shoot a deer. It's also, I'd like to take just a moment left to address the concern that some have raised regarding the source of handguns that are used in gun crimes in Canada. While some have said that handguns are not legally obtained anyways, the reality is that the majority of gun crimes in 2020 were originally legally obtained, domestically sourced guns. Over 50% of these guns can be traced. To combat crimes committed with handguns that are obtained outside Canada, our government has invested $350 million to strengthen the RCMP and CBSA's capacity to intercept guns coming across our borders. And we know that this has been effective. In fact, last year, the RCMP and Border Services have intercepted nearly double the number of firearms than the year before. So, Madam Speaker, we are heading in the right direction. We are making it tougher on people smuggling guns, going from 10 years to 14 years penalties. We're looking at introducing further money to help with the guns and gangs and through the Building Safer Communities funds in our communities. And the provisions that we have in C-21 are complementary to what other work we're doing in mental health and in controlling access to things that can hurt Canadians. So, Madam Speaker, I'll turn it back over to you and look forward to the questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Kootenay, Columbia.